This is Steve Ballmer. He's the co-founder of Microsoft, the guy who once said, "Developers, developers, developers." And he's the 8th richest person on planet Earth. His net worth is nearly $100 billion. He's also the current owner of the LA Clippers. He's got more money than he knows what to do with, even amongst NBA owners. And recently, he's been flexing his financial muscles to an unprecedented degree. Some are starting to worry that he might be breaking the NBA. Here's why. Throughout their relatively short history in the NBA, the Clippers have been a, quote, cursed franchise due to their lack of success and terrible luck. Before Ballmer, they had an infamous scumbag owner, Donald Sterling, who certainly didn't help matters in that regard. But things started to turn around in 2009 when Blake Griffin was drafted. The team immediately improved, and it wasn't long before Chris Paul joined Griffin to form the Lob City era for the Clippers, one of the franchise's most successful runs by far. Flash forward to 2014, when the Donald Sterling scandal broke. It was unquestionably a black mark for the franchise and for the NBA as a whole, but in a perverse sense, you could almost call it a blessing in disguise too, because he was always known as a notoriously thrifty and unhelpful owner to his team managers. So, when Adam Silver famously banished him from the league, he ended up being forced to sell the Clips. Enter Steve Ballmer. Ballmer bought the team for $2 billion in 2014. Although he was immediately ever present on the sidelines at the Staples Center, it took some time for Ballmer to really make his mark on the team. First, there was the infamous rebrand from the old iconic logo to the new Microsoft Word-style clip art logo. Then there was the dissolution of the CP3 Blake Griffin era in LA, which was not exactly harmonious. Griffin was notoriously traded months after being promised that he would be a Clipper for life. So, the team was adrift in the competitive Western Conference. But fairly quickly, they started to turn things around. First, they brought in a consultant, the highly sought-after Jerry West, who has tended to have a positive influence on the front offices he's been involved with in recent years. See one Golden State Warriors. This was our first example of Ballmer's willingness to spend. West's multi-million-dollar salary as nominally a part-time consultant is not something many owners would be chomping at the bit to dole out. After all, at the end of the day, it would be coming out of Ballmer's pocket in one way or another. But West was in fact brought in, and his value was immediately evident. The Clippers' rebuild was lightning fast. They had an opportunity to capitalize on a couple of disgruntled free agents, namely two Los Angeles natives in Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, both of whom wanted to come home to LA, but neither of whom wanted to play alongside LeBron James with the Lakers. Nonetheless, the thought of two free agents joining the Clippers, even if they were both LA natives, had previously just been fantasy. The team's historic lack of success had always exempted them from competing for the NBA's best free agents, despite being in the NBA's preeminent market, at least from the perspective of many players. But the Lob City era of success and Steve Ballmer's infectious enthusiasm significantly enhanced the team's public image. So lo and behold, in 2019, following Kawhi's championship run with the Raptors, the Clips were able to lure both he and Paul George in one fell swoop. But it wasn't easy. Kawhi only wanted to come if George had been traded for first. So the Clippers, understandably desperate to nab not only one but two superstar free agents, consummated a huge blockbuster trade with the OKC Thunder, sending a war chest of first-round picks and young talent, including Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, in exchange for Paul George. And true to his word, Kawhi followed suit by opting out and signing with the Clippers. It was the start of the modern era for the Clips. Unfortunately, the modern era of the Clippers thus far has been mostly disappointing due to a string of injuries. With that being said though, Tyronn Lue's leadership at head coach, and an impressive stable of savvy veterans, and a growing list of young homegrown talent like Terrence Mann, on top of the obvious superstar talent, means that the Clips are unquestionably a sleeping giant. And recent trades have brought in even more talented players, a truly unprecedented amount of depth, specifically at the small forward wing positions. The highly sought-after prototypical small forward 3-and-D wing archetype is something that the Clippers currently have in spades, obviously with Kawhi and PG, but also Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Nick Batum, Luke Kennard, the aforementioned Terrence Mann, and the list goes on. Suffice it to say, the Clippers are an extremely deep and talented team and have the potential to make a significant run in the playoffs, if not win the NBA championship. But this brings us back to Ballmer. Most teams would not have been able to assemble this roster. Why? Well, the Clips' current salary on the books, especially after signing point guard John Wall, is about $193 million. That's the most in the NBA. It's already well past the salary cap and the luxury tax lines. Teams that are over the tax get penalized heavily for each additional dollar they have on the books. The Clippers are currently looking at a luxury tax bill of about $144 million. That is a staggering amount of luxury tax to be burdened with, as more or less it comes out of the owner's pocket and gets paid to the other owners who are not over the line. And due to some recent changes with the way the tax works, teams are paying more in tax recently than they ever have before. Last year's $170 million tax payment by the Warriors was the highest ever, but they won the championship, so all things considered, it was probably worth it. But the Clippers are approaching that number now too, with only the hope of a championship and Ballmer's willingness to spend as the rationale. This is the crux of the issue as to why Ballmer's nearly unlimited wealth is becoming an issue for the NBA. There has never been an owner with this much wealth in the history of the league. The rules were set up to deter teams from assembling payrolls that significantly exceeded the salary cap and luxury tax. There have only been a few examples of teams spending this aggressively in the league. The Warriors recently, and the Brooklyn Nets under the punch-drunk ownership of Mikhail Prokhorov are probably the two most obvious examples. The Warriors infamously signed Kelly Oubre in 2020, knowing that they would consequently be paying an extra $80 million in luxury tax. But what differentiates Ballmer from those examples is the unforeseen scale of his wealth, coupled with his sustained competitiveness and willingness to spend. He makes, quote, regular billionaires look like paupers with his nearly $100 billion net worth. That's more money than 27 of the other 29 owners combined. If he spent $1 million a day on the Clippers, he could go on for 100,000 days. Suffice it to say, most other owners would understandably be unwilling to sign off on a minor, or in some cases major, player acquisition if it meant taking them significantly into the luxury tax. Even the richest of the rich don't like throwing away hundreds of millions of dollars to marginally improve their team's competitive advantage. But Ballmer seems capable of doing just that, and he certainly has the resources to do so, more than any other NBA owner ever has before. This is truly an unprecedented situation. Now, to be fair, Ballmer probably would not be willing to spend hundreds of millions in tax payments if the team wasn't quite as good as they currently are. They truly are championship contenders, or at the very least in the conversation, and if they weren't, he probably would take his foot off the financial pedal, at least to a certain extent. But that is far from the situation that the Clippers currently find themselves in. As it stands, we are not quite in uncharted waters yet, but over the next few years, as the Clips are truly at the precipice of winning a championship, and Ballmer's enthusiasm and competitiveness continue to rise, we very well might see some truly staggering tax payments, which could have interesting implications for future CBA negotiations. By 2024, the current CBA will have expired and the league will negotiate a new one. And it's not a stretch to say that many of the other owners throughout the league are not too keen on allowing this type of repeated salary cap abuse to continue unchecked. But player acquisitions and luxury tax payments are not the only way in which Ballmer's unlimited wealth is potentially affecting the league. He's also in the middle of a huge construction project to build the Clippers their own state-of-the-art arena. See, since 1999, the Clippers have been sharing the former Staples Center, now Crypto.com Arena, with the Lakers in downtown LA. But this has obviously not been an ideal arrangement for the Clips. The Lakers have long been the dominant franchise in the city by a huge margin, which constantly causes the Clippers to consequently feel like the little brother franchise. The purple and gold have dominated the Los Angeles sports fandom for decades, and the Lakers' recent success in the early 2000s, specifically with Shaq and Kobe in that building, has only exacerbated the stigma. So, unsurprisingly, there have been rumblings ever since Ballmer bought the Clippers that he's been itching to relocate the team. Initially, there were rumors that he wanted to relocate to Seattle, but that idea quickly died down for a variety of reasons, so relocating to a new arena in the Los Angeles area quickly became the new goal. But building a 20,000-seat arena in the LA metro area is not exactly a walk in the park. The amount of red tape and bureaucratic hurdles to jump through, on top of the staggering cost due to land, taxes, labor, and materials, makes it a monumental undertaking which only someone with nearly unlimited resources would even endeavor to take on. And that's why Ballmer is specially suited for the task. Many other NBA owners would not have the resources or frankly the determination to get a monumental task like this done. In fact, until recently, building a new stadium was something owners would leverage against the municipality that they were in. It was a bargaining chip that they could use to save money and increase revenues by forcing their city's hand to subsidize the construction. Help us build a new arena and we'll stick around in your town. It will be a quote public good for your citizens, they would argue. Don't subsidize us and we might just relocate to another city. Obviously, this was the infamous situation in Seattle that led the Supersonics to be relocated to OKC in the first place by Oklahoma native Clay Bennett in a move which was ultimately a surprise to no one. Nevertheless, over the past few years, a couple of teams have started to buck that trend by privately financing their own arenas. The Warriors are the most prominent example of this recently, privately financing and constructing their brand new shiny Chase Center in downtown San Francisco and raking in all the profits as a result. It seems like every other TV segment or podcast discussing the Warriors brings up their unprecedented revenue from the Chase Center at every home game. And other owners have taken note, as the Philadelphia 76ers have just recently announced their intentions to abandon the Wells Fargo Center in South Philly for a new privately financed arena in downtown Philadelphia by the 2030s. But of course, the Clippers are currently undertaking this project right now. The new arena, which is scheduled to open in 2024, broke ground last year, so progress has been steady. But the project has not always been smooth sailing. The location of the new stadium just so happens to be near the Forum, famously, of course, the former home of the Lakers in Inglewood, which is also next door to the shiny new home of the reigning Super Bowl champion LA Rams. But a roadblock quickly emerged as the Forum was owned by none other than the MSG Group, also known as New York Knicks owner James Dolan's company. If anyone knows anything about James Dolan, they know he's not one to roll over without a fight, whether it's justified or not. And that was definitely the case in this instance, as Dolan's company immediately indicated their opposition to a new arena around the corner from the Forum. They claimed that the city of Inglewood made them a deal to be the primary arena and venue for events in the city, and therefore a new arena would be a breach of contract. They claimed the agreement to okay the new arena between the Clippers and the city of Inglewood was an illegal backroom deal. So it quickly became clear that a legal battle was set to endanger the project and potentially drag it out for years, if not kill it entirely. Ballmer seemed undeterred and intent to push forward despite the controversy. But finally, in 2020, he did address the issue head-on. In an unprecedented move, a move that perhaps 29 other NBA owners would not have had the disposable income or the cojones to do, he straight up bought the Forum from the MSG Group for $300 million, circumventing the entire controversy completely. I mean, what's $300 million when you're worth nearly $100 billion, right? Ballmer obviously had no intention going into the project of owning two redundant stadiums within a 1-mile radius of each other. But as soon as the opportunity arose to essentially buy his way through the roadblock that was slowing the arena down, he did so. Once that hurdle was out of the way, construction began on the new arena, and as I mentioned before, it's now well underway. It's on track to be completed on time by 2024. And make no mistake about this arena, it will be completely state-of-the-art and will supposedly push the boundaries for NBA arenas. It will reportedly have a giant Halo-style screen like the SoFi Stadium next door in lieu of a traditional Jumbotron. And it will also supposedly be featuring a European soccer-style continuous wall of fans on one side with no interruptions from the baseline all the way to the ceiling. And Ballmer has even alluded to a potential standing-only section. Suffice it to say, this new arena will unsurprisingly be sparing no expense. So, time will tell if Ballmer's extreme displays of cash splashing will ultimately pay off. As I said before, the Clippers' current incarnation has been beset by injuries and disappointment, with some encouraging developmental stories and postseason successes strewn in between. But there's no denying the talent on the roster currently at full strength, and all indications are that Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and the rest of the team are fully healthy and raring to go for the 2022-23 season. The Clippers are still perhaps being overlooked by the betting markets and the general public, but I would overlook the two-time Finals MVP at your own peril. Kawhi has proven to be one of the best players in the league, even on a somewhat limited playing schedule. Therefore, the next few years in LA are going to be pivotal for Ballmer and the Clippers. In a couple of years, they could be in a fancy new arena with a championship banner hanging from the rafters and a bright outlook going forwards. Or, on the other hand, they could be looking at more of the same throughout their franchise history: disappointment, stuck in the shadow of their crosstown big brother. Only time will tell, but one thing's for sure: having the 8th richest man on planet Earth and the richest owner in the history of the NBA bankrolling your team's future can't hurt. Alright, so that'll do it for us today. We'll be back soon with more NBA content throughout the summer. Subscribe to NBA Recap so you don't miss an episode, and thanks for tuning in.